Hello, hello. Today's guest, Doug Taylor, CEO of Frontiers Design Build. He's been in business 18 years. He's going to hit over 8 million this year. I've known Doug for 15 years, we figured out on the podcast. He's been in business 18 years. He does landscape and home slash even apartment reno, construction, design, build, and he's developed a very strong niche in high performance homes, which you'll learn all about. Doug has 4 business partners. It started off just him, and then he brought on his brother, he brought on James, who brought the whole carpentry experience. And that's where you're going to learn about how Doug went from being a landscape company to really being a construction company, home, design, build, and possibly soon to be apartments. But he's still a landscaper at heart. He's a landscape architect. He's going to be speaking. He'll be on our panel for AI on the Summer Growth Summit, August 18 to 20th. And he will share just a little bit in this podcast on the back half about how he uses AI, but he's got some great tools he's developed, and he'll share all that at the summit. But you'll hear a little bit about how he's used it to help him pivot into a new business line. He'll share that later. He also shares about the whole idea of whether landscapers should do the house flip, should they have a carpentry division, should they get into even deeper than that, and what he gets these questions asked a lot, so he gives advice on that. And really, he also shares how he's balanced the overhead, right? The landscape overhead can afford a much higher overhead with a much higher gross margin. The actual home construction overhead needs to be lower because the margins are much lower. And he talked about the difficulty in that in sort of the in-between years before he really shifted from a landscape heavy company to a landscape light company. And so a lot of business knowledge here. He's been in our peer group community for, like I said, 15 years. And he started off when he was tiny, really. We wouldn't even take him today at the size he was way back then. And he's just crushing it. He's a smart guy, very thoughtful, as you'll see here today. You'll learn quite a bit, regardless of what niche you're in. You'll hear how a guy thinks about growth, thinks about how one should pivot in our industry. And ultimately, we end up talking about AI, and then we get into a little bit of fishing and hunting at the very end. Here we go. Doug Taylor, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Tell the audience who you are, the name of your business, and a couple details.
Sure. Doug Taylor, Frontiers Design Build. So we are out of Guelph, Ontario, Canada. And we are strictly a design build company, which makes us somewhat unique within the peer group community, I think. But do you want the whole background, the whole history?
Well, we'll get there in a second. So your current business model is design build. How do you even say it? Wood structure or home building and landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the purposes of this conversation, we'll call it landscape design build and construction, with construction being, whole home renovations, custom homes. We're into some multi-unit buildings, so a little bit of like commercial, institutional, that type of work. So yeah, we'll just call that construction.
Okay. Yeah. So I met we met how many years ago?
I checked. So it was actually 2011.
11.
So 15 years.
15 years, yeah. And when you started, you were teeny tiny company, all landscape, working, I don't know, 120 hours a week. Take us back to how you started.
Yeah, so I'm a landscape architect. So I've got a degree in landscape architecture. I've got my seal. So yeah, like as you said, I started the business in 2008 as a landscape design build company. Had a few guys and grew it from there. In about 2014, I took on a couple partners. So James and Adam. James bringing a carpentry skill set to the organization. And so we kind of ran with that. And for a number of years after that partnership, it was kind of two sister companies inside or under one roof. We were doing the landscape design build, but we were also getting pretty heavy into renovations at the time.
So
And so
Adam's your brother, right?
that's right. Yeah.
And James was just a good friend, I guess.
He had worked for me for a few summers while they were still in school, and yeah, I being more the entrepreneurial one. As James graduated and started his own business, he would come to me for business advice because I was kind of a few years ahead of him at the time. And so those meetings became frequent enough that, eventually I just said, hey, why are we doing this separately? Why don't we team up? I'll take care of the business and you can work on the craft. And we can do both, landscape and construction work. So that's how that kind of started.
Is that a good model, do you think, for anyone listening?
That's not a straightforward answer. I think it's something that you really need to lean into. And we took the scenic route into kind of figuring that out. You know, there was um, there was a lot of, I would say, from that merger, that partnership of 2014-15, for probably a good 5 years, we kind of danced around the 60-40 revenue split. And, sometimes it would be 60-40 one way, sometimes 60-40 the other, or 50-50. And that brought up some challenges that we didn't really kind of anticipate as we started to kind of hone in on each side of the businesses. We can get into some of the details, but the
Yeah, go ahead.
financial framework for those two different business models under one roof, they're pretty different. And so that poses challenges when you're trying to, forecast and budget for an upcoming year and you don't know which financial model is going to represent, 40% of the business or 60% of the business.
And so just to
So
be
it made
clear,
it made those times a little tough.
so Doug, just to clarify, 40, 60, 60, 40. So landscape design build versus like carpentry renovation and
Got it.
some home building.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you want to just really high level on the numbers, as you're very well aware, a landscape design build operation, you're going to be, 45 to 55% gross margin, kind of on average. Overhead, 35 to 40% as percentage of revenue, which gives you that 10% net ish. Whereas construction work, you're kind of 25 to 30% gross margin, 15 to 20% overhead, which gives you that 10% net. And so, if on one side of the business you're generating a 50% gross margin, and the other side of the business you're generating a 25% gross margin, but then you're heading into a year and you don't know what the mix is going to be based on the sales that are going to occur. That presents some challenges. All the while, trying to figure out and refine both of these models in parallel.
Yeah. So the challenges being that the overhead structures, the amount of overhead is different on each side of the business.
That's right. Yep. And
So
then
if
so,
you're,
I mean, we spent some years trying to essentially consolidate the overhead and really turn it into one operation, refine our sales and our design and estimating processes so that they were the same on both sides of the business, even, labor rates and this type of thing. So there was a lot of trial and error, a lot of figuring things out. But we found, now, I mean, if you kind of fast forward to today, where we're about 20% landscape and about 80% construction, it's becoming a lot easier because, we've drifted more towards that construction model. Um, and the landscape, because it's at a higher margin, it's kind of just, it's a bit of gravy to the pot. So we've really been able to kind of stabilize our operation.
so you've stabilized it by taking the lower overhead model and making that your model.
That's right.
And so I'm just going to repeat what you said because it's interesting. And then landscape is the gravy. That is interesting. And so does it still fluctuate a lot, or you don't care if it fluctuates because it's gravy?
It's kind of stabilized. We've kind of determined that 20% of landscape, that's what we can, self-perform repeatedly. It's been, 4 or 5 years now where we've produced that volume of landscape work repeatedly. And so I like to say we've kind of put the landscape division in a bit of like maintenance mode. It's kind of stabilized as far as like the size and the pricing model and that type of thing. Whereas the construction side of the business is what's growing. And so as that continues to grow on the construction side, we might see that we might see it be, 80-20 or 90-10, that type of thing. But for all intents and purposes, we're at a model now that we're going to be able to stick with for a little bit.
Did you always have that inkling in the back of your mind that you would shift towards wood construction, or did it surprise you as well?
I can't say that it was some grand plan. It's kind of like it almost feels like a bit of like we're running a marathon in kind of on a foggy day, where you can see ahead of you.
Really?
You can see ahead of you, so you can stay on the path, but like that final destination is still like a little bit unclear. And so I think you're just constantly recalibrating, you're constantly refining the vision, adjusting the vision. It's the same with like, budgeting and forecasting. You're always implementing new information as you go when you reforecast or things
Yeah.
like that. But
But I want to go
yeah,
back to early on. Did you have
yeah,
like early on, like I'm going to become a construction mogul? I mean, was that anything like that in your head?
no. Uh, I mean, at those couple stepping stones and or inflection points, I mean, in 2014, 15, when we bolted on that construction division to the business, it was more from a sense of cross-selling and low-hanging fruit. And, why not service our customers in both realms? You're essentially moving to more repeat clientele than having to find and turn over closed leads. A lot of those early days, we'd be doing kitchen remodels for people we had built landscapes for 2 years
Right.
prior to that, right? So
Yeah.
that was kind of how that happened. I think what the big catalyst for pushing us to where we are now was about 2019. We were exposed to high performance construction, and we can get into a little bit about what that actually means. But I think that's where my team's passion really started to boil. And we really latched on to that as an approach to construction. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
wanting to be on the leading edge and do it the right way. And it kind of became a bit of a rallying call and something we could build a niche around, which I think is important to, find your niche and your passion. And so that high performance approach is kind of what really kind of galvanized the vision and the direction. And we've really ran with that in the last 5 or 6 years. And you can see that in our brand, our value proposition, all these things. You can really kind of see that identity in that high performance approach.
It's kind of like chapters of, like, yeah, like
Totally.
major chapters in your history. I was just thinking, Doug, not even in context of this, but this morning I was just reflecting how all the great companies that I know, like all of them, have made one or multiple pivots to get to that greatness. I mean, you see it on Shark Tank, you see it with Apple, you're describing it right here in front of us. And so it's almost like if you look at a company and they haven't pivoted yet, you could almost say, yeah, they're either not on that path to greatness or they haven't really figured out what's going to click for them. And I know that's not 100% true, but it's you're a kind of a living example of a multiple pivots.
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of our trade partners will come to me and because they see that vision in those chapters. And typically with trade contractors, whether it be an electrician or a mason and I don't want to lump them all into one bucket, but typically these trade contractors, they'll learn their craft, at a young age through an apprenticeship, and then 30, 40 years later, they're kind of just putting the boots on and doing the same thing over and over. And there's no chapters to that journey. And so I think you're right. Like, I mean, Frontiers has become kind of an example of that pivoting and that chapter book. And certainly kind of locally and regionally, we have that reputation for being able to pivot and being kind of on the leading edge of things.
So let's dive into what is a high performance home that you mentioned that's your newest
Yeah.
chapter.
Yep. I've had to explain this a lot over the years, so I feel like I've kind of narrowed it down because it's kind of a complex proposition. But essentially, it's an advanced approach to construction, and it's essentially a robust approach to the building envelope. So things that we address would be really robust layers of insulation, airtightness, so a really airtight enclosure on the building, a lot of those technical things, but ultimately the outcomes are kind of lumped into three buckets. So the common one that people perceive as energy efficiency. So if a building is, highly insulated and it's airtight, it's going to use less energy, which is a hot topic these days. Low operational costs or low life cycle costs. So it might cost a little bit more upfront to build a building of that caliber, but long term, you're going to save money, right? It's kind of the same as like buying an electric car. Might be a little bit pricier up front, but like the operating costs are a lot lower. So that's kind of the one bucket, energy efficiency. The second is occupant comfort. Um, so there's a range, but thermal comfort is a big one. So I'm sure people, especially in the north, they can relate to a cold stuffy basement, but then also in the summer like a hot, uncomfortable second floor bedroom, or sitting next to like a drafty door or window. So when you have a really robust envelope to a building, the thermal consistency and comfort throughout the building is very high. When creating an airtight building, you have full control over the indoor air quality. So fresh filtered air continuously. So yeah, the air quality is super high. And these days, when people are dealing with asthma, or trying to dial in their lifestyle, and they're thinking about these things, that's kind of an important factor. When you've got really thick walls like this, these buildings are very quiet. So, just the sense of peacefulness inside. You're not hearing the cars on the street. You're not hearing the storm outside. So all of this back to that kind of occupant or homeowner experience. And then lastly, the third bucket is kind of durability, resilience, longevity. So, most buildings that are built conventionally these days, kind of like a 30 to 50-year lifespan. Like, that if you're going to buy a house and it's 30 or 40 years old already, you kind of know going into it, I'm probably going to have to replace the windows. I'm probably going to have to do a renovation. I'm going to, there's probably no insulation in the walls. I'm probably going to have to do that. Whereas when you take a high performance approach, and certainly if you do something like, net zero or passive house certification, these are buildings that are 100-year buildings, 200-year buildings. So they're generational buildings. They just last because the building science is there to protect the structure of the walls. The walls dry out intentionally. So there's a lot of reasons to do this. The challenge that we face in kind of the broad market adoption to high performance is the cost. So I like to say that there's kind of like a value over cost approach that needs to be taken. It's the simple proposition of like, we're talking spending like 5 to 10% more to get a building that's 50% better, 100% better. So the value is there, but when many parts of the US and Canada are dealing with an affordability crisis, it's very hard to tell builders to add 5% to the cost, because it's a marketability issue, right?
Is it really only 5% more?
Well, if done correctly, right? So if you try to bolt on high performance features to a conventional design, it can be more costly because it's kind of square peg round hole. But if you're addressing, or you're taking this approach right from the start in early design phases, you can design the building in such a way that it accepts these features. There's ways to go about it efficiently if you look at it from a holistic approach, right from early design through to construction.
Okay. You this concept is very not obvious, but easy to understand for me living in New Orleans, where many homes are, 80 years old or 100 years old. And I have friends with homes that they can't keep it warm in the winter and they can't keep it cool in the summer. And then our house was renovated in 2019, and God, it barely takes anything to make it
Yep.
comfortable. So it's a
Right.
cost and a comfort issue for sure. So is this a German, like, where did this come from? It sounds German to me, but
Yeah, there's a bit of German there. So, I mean, if you look at passive house certification, which is kind of the gold standard of high performance, like that's the top. That'd be the highest technical certification. That's a German building standard. In the early days, I think it was back in the 70s or 80s, it was actually some Canadian and German building science guys that kind of collaborated to come up with the premise. The Germans really refined it and carried it on. So the Passive House Institute is in Darmstadt, Germany. So that's kind of the mecca, the headquarters of Passive House. North American, you've got standards like net zero, which are very popular. Net zero is kind of working its way into building code, trying to get the production home industry, the broad market industry towards net zero, which is kind of the entry level of high performance. But yeah, I think it's becoming a lot more commonplace, but there's just, there's that wide spectrum of high performance.
So, as you market and sell this, is this an upsell or is the demand there and pulling you towards the clients?
Yeah, at the moment, I would say it's more of an upsell. We've found that, you want to get the people in the door and then kind of slowly educate them along the way during the pre-construction process. Explaining to them, during schematic design, why we're orienting the house in a certain way to capture that southern exposure. Or the next conversation, you might be talking about insulation and air tightness, and you're explaining why, so that they understand and they're making informed decisions along the way. If you put too much of it on upfront, it can be overwhelming, and you can kind of scare them away with that a little bit of extra cost. So we found we kind of have to lead the horse to water on a lot of this.
Have you had any big clients that they've just come to you? I heard about this. I want this.
Yeah, for sure, it does happen, but we're certainly in that early adopter stage where it's a sliver of the market that are those classic early adopters that, the first ones to buy the Teslas, or where we find that there's a lot of academics that do a lot of self research. So maybe they're an engineer, an architect, or a professor that, when they're about to go build a house or doing a renovate, they're going to educate themselves. They're going to go down the rabbit holes online and stumble across net zero or passive house, and then, oh, this is a good idea, and then maybe search out a builder that claims to provide those services, like.
What advice? I'm going to segue here a little bit. So, what advice would you give to a landscape company or business owner that is thinking of flipping homes in the winter to keep their guys busy, or they want to add on a carpentry division, even if it's just for pergolas and maybe gazebos, let alone even doing standalone structures like you do? Any advice?
Yeah, I mean, I get this one a lot in the peer group setting. It's challenging because to do it well, it really is it's a different model. It's different staff, it's a different pricing model, it's a different overhead structure. So I get it. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that want to find something other than snow. Snow has been pretty challenging for a lot of people. But yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to take landscape construction staff and bring them inside in the winter, for a number of reasons. I mean, um, from the very basic of, I mean, you're in people's homes. When we're building a backyard, you're out back. You're not really disturbing people's lives on that same level as you would
Yeah.
be during a renovation.
Yeah.
The skill set is different. I mean, the attention to detail needed inside is much higher than outside. There's a lot more moving parts when it comes to renovations or construction. Typically on a backyard build, you might have your pool contractor, irrigation. Now, there might be 3 to 6 trade contractors involved in a backyard build. Whereas on a renovation, you'd commonly have 15 to 20, right? Because you're plumbing, electrical, drywall, tape, paint, roof, siding, foundation, like you name it. It's just a lot more moving parts. And so, right from top to bottom, there's a lot of reasons why it's very different. So I guess I'd just caution people trying to, dabble in it. Not to say that people can't figure it out. I mean, we did. So it's obviously doable, but I don't think it's quite that easy fix that maybe some people think it might be. To, pivot from snow to doing some renovations.
What about a company that brings on a carpentry division and then they find demand going up and down and for that product? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, that's a little bit more of a logical approach, similar to, acquiring, say you're a landscape design build company, you're acquiring an irrigation company, or acquiring a tree company, something that is a little bit of a different model, and you're bolting that on to the organization. You could do the same with carpentry or construction, if you had that person to champion it. I think there's obviously some synergies with indoor carpentry and exterior, the seasonality of doing a lot of, pergolas and decks and pool houses in the summer, and then bathrooms and kitchens and basements in the winter. That could make a lot of sense. But again, you need that divisional manager, or, champion of that new segment, to be experienced and skilled. It's not something like, I don't think you could take, your your talented landscape foreman or and just shove them over there and say, hey, figure it out. You'd probably want to look from somewhere outside the organization. And so I think, yeah, if you're gonna kind of acquire and bolt that on from the outside, similar ways to, again, an irrigation company or a tree service company or whatever it is, I think that's probably the logical route to take. But then, you circle back to why some people kind of toy with this idea is it's, well, I'd like to get out of snow and I'd like to keep my staff busy in the winter. Well, it's not really what I'm suggesting. It's kind of two different angles. So it's like, what's the goal here?
It's an interesting idea. So that also says to me, if you're going to bolt on a carpentry deck division, do they have the skills to do indoor work? And if they don't, are you back in the same boat?
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, even within carpentry and construction like that, outdoor carpentry and indoor, they're two very different things.
Totally. You can
Yeah.
take a tree with a bad side and turn it 90 degrees or 180, but you can't do that easily on indoor work,
Right.
right? You can't, if you nick something outside, okay, people expect that. Inside, you're in trouble. Yeah. All right. What do you envision? What's the next chapter? Can you see through the fog to, yeah, to what's coming next for you
Yeah.
guys?
I mean, to be honest, I'm kind of in the thick of writing the next chapter. So we've kind of stumbled into multi-unit residential buildings. So an opportunity popped up through an architect that we work with on a regular basis to submit a proposal for a 10 unit multi residential building. And it's kind of an interesting story, but it's actually a supportive housing project. So it's an affordable housing building for at-risk youth between the ages of 16 and 25. So there's not for profit that we're working with that specifically does this. And so we thought, affordable housing, is this really kind of the right type of project for us to be looking at? And what we realized early on was the outcomes for these not-for-profits were very parallel to the outcomes for a higher end residential client looking for a high performance builder. So again, when we kind of touch on those three silos of low operating costs, occupant comfort, and durability and resilience, well, a not-for-profit is going to want those things for their building as well. These not-for-profits, they can go out and they can get grants and fundings to build their building, but their operational funding is actually quite low. So they do want that higher caliber building because they have a lot of that access to those upfront costs or to cover those upfront costs, but their operating costs are always an issue, right? Being a not-for-profit that caters to supportive housing, they're very occupant focused, right? So they want that indoor air quality. They want that comfort, and they're also often a very stewardship minded, right? So they care about the planet, they care about the people, they want these buildings to last generations and not just decades, right? And so what we realized is that they're after what we're selling as well. So I've been doing a lot of strategy work lately on how we can kind of tap into that market, building relationships with various developers and not-for-profit organizations locally, different decision makers, some politicians, on how we can become that expert authority on high performance affordable housing initiatives. And so, just as recent as a couple of weeks ago, the city put out an RFP. They want to do three affordable fourplexes on city-owned residential land. And so we're in the midst of applying for that opportunity. We have to put in a written proposal and some pricing on that. And so I would say I've been spending about probably half my time the last week and a half on crafting that written submission for that opportunity. But I think we're an excellent fit for that because high profile project being run by the city, they're going to want to be able to trust their design build contractor. They're going to want that expert in the field, and that's kind of that's the story we're telling. That's the expertise that we're bringing to the table. So I think that's where our real growth opportunity is. Where the single family home, like the regular residential home market, is kind of flatlined in our area right now. This stuff is all full speed ahead. It's ramping up. So it's another pivot to something that we are a good fit for, to something that is happening. And to be honest, that's probably the sole purpose of why we're growing right now. The landscape division is kind of chugging along. We're steady. The renovation, like the typical residential home stuff, like again, we're steady. I would say we're steady to busy, but it's this multi-unit residential building sector that we've just recently pushed into that's just going bananas. I can contribute kind of all of our busyness and growth probably to that.
So that brings in the beauty of diversification with the long arc of pivoting. It's good. You are going to be on our panel, our AI panel at
That's
our
right.
summer growth summit, August 18 to 20, and you're going to be there the first day for our pre-event, and we're going to have you and a few other from our peer group community speaking and really sharing what you're doing, how you're using AI. And I bet whatever you're going to tell us in August will be, you'll have pivoted probably on this topic as well to some extent or added to it.
Yeah.
But tell us a bit about how you're using AI now. And I think you I think you break it up into a couple phases. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, everything we've been talking about the last half hour or so is I've run through AI. So it's really been that force multiplier or thought partner or whatever you want to call it for me on a strategic level. And the journey to kind of getting to that point of utilizing it has been interesting. I think a lot of us, as it's come out, we've been helping it, or we've been getting it to help us, write emails. We copy and paste a draft in there, and it would make it sound better, right? And I think that's where a lot of people are at with it. And then you move to the intermediate levels of getting it to help you through a task or something. Clean up this list or make me a chart, or I'm building this. Help me work through how many square feet of X I need, or what have you. But where it's become very interesting for me is the strategic thinking. So, whether it be pushing into this new chapter, like we just talked about, the marketing strategy behind it. I've had conversations with my AI partner on, relationship building and business building and keeping that all organized, who I'm reaching out to, what meetings I've had, what we've talked about, key points that I need to touch on, next meetings, or who I should be, trying to reach out to. And I think what I've learned along the way is that the knowledge base, this is what I call it, at least I think it's the correct terminology, but the knowledge base is kind of critical to the whole utilization of AI. And so what knowledge base is to me is essentially teaching it who you are, teaching it about your business, about your vision, about your systems and processes. So it's essentially layering in your organizational framework, giving it your documents, giving it your context, your org chart, your all of these things so that it can understand and provide better feedback. And I can see, black and white from when I started using it. The answers were, kind of vague, maybe a bit off, but now it knows me and my organization so well from that knowledge base that it's almost like I'm talking to somebody, like one of my team members that's in the business. And just, the level at which you can kind of put a bunch of garbage in there and it can really clean it up and streamline it. It's super impressive. So I mean, I probably utilize it, I would say 2 hours a day ish, roughly at this point. And like I feel like I'm getting, you know, 3 times the quality in a tenth the time type of thing. So that's that, force multiplier effect. And it's really changed the dynamic of my workflow. I'm just getting so much more done. So yeah, it's kind of like it's kind of accelerating everything I'm doing.
And you're saying it's helping you with this next pivot.
Yeah.
How did you use it to, or how are you using it in that pivot?
I mean, this next pivot, I'm in kind of the business development stage. So it's a lot of marketing and a lot of business development. So we have something we call our client resource guide, which is essentially a booklet that we use in an initial sales settings. And it's just kind of a peek behind the curtain a bit more about us and about our process. And so as we've diversified, like it's kind of like a generic piece. So as we've diversified, especially into this multi-unit building segment, I found that I needed kind of a secondary piece to utilize in those situations where our client resource guide is just a bit too vague. I wanted to kind of dive deeper into that. And so with all of the context in my knowledge base, I was just able to kind of explain the context of, hey, we're pushing into this. I'd like a shorter, consolidated marketing piece on this multi-unit sector that I can utilize in these business development conversations. And so we basically, like, in a matter of an hour or two, I was able to develop this kind of trifold brochure that talked about, mission alignment, outcomes, those outcomes of energy efficiency and occupant comfort and durability and resilience, and kind of touching on some of the softer notes that, are more effective in a sales situation without kind of getting into the weeds of technical stuff. So I really got across the finish line very quickly there, and it was a very impressive piece. Like, it turned out really, really well. And I feel like it would have taken me much longer, a lot of different iterations. I probably wouldn't have come to that final draft with it being kind of as on point as it is. Just my own personal bias and perspective, it probably would have spoke about more of the technical elements in nature as opposed to the occupant outcomes and benefits. So I was blown away by, the caliber of the finished product that I was able to produce there on that marketing piece, and how quickly. So, and then, once I was done that one, I was able just to say, okay, well, now let's do one for renovations. Let's do one for landscapes. Let's do one for accessory dwellings. And so for each of our business units, I was just able to essentially auto generate these marketing pieces that were totally on point and really well done, basically at a click of a button. The other big area that comes to mind is just I'm on a bit of a mission and tear to build relationships in this sector with I've got a short list of kind of 10 or 15 people, and so keeping that strategy organized, and so just kind of having a chat open that is that business building conversation with my AI, and updating it on conversations I had with these people, and who to talk to next and why, and kind of layering in the strategy about it. Again, to kind of sit there with a notepad and do that all yourself, you wouldn't get there in any timely manner. But having that thought partner, guiding you along the way, as long as they have that knowledge base and that context, it's just extremely powerful.
Are
So
you
it's any
using
number
it
of things.
to find your contacts or on how to address them?
Yep. Yeah, I had to kind of scour the industry and come up with a bit of a short list, of which I used a couple. But you start talking to these. It's a small community, so as soon as you kind of get the ball rolling, they all kind of refer each other, and you build out that list a little bit more accuracy, or with more accuracy. But yeah, certainly in those early days, I had it help me kind of generate that list.
Got it. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to having you on the panel. I know you have a lot of tools and strategies on, or tools, I should say, for how you use AI, and I'm sure you'll be light years ahead by the time we see you in August. But leave the audience with like one to do, one concrete thing. What tech, which AI do you like for what you're doing? And if somebody wants to sort of copy and use it the same way you are.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like asking, what brand of car do you like? I think it's less about whether it's Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever it is. I think it's less about the platform and more about your approach. We're in the midst of a paradigm shift. This is going from riding a horse to driving a car. Like, this is big. And so recently we've kind of realized the gravity of this and the magnitude of this, and we've kind of taken a step back, and we're really looking at our whole IT infrastructure, because AI is not just jumping online and opening it up and asking a question. It's going to get very integrated. And so, when you look at cloud storage, your AI, your image generators, your copywriter, helper, all these things, it's going to be very integrated. Building in your SOPs and your processes into your knowledge base, you kind of have to take a step back to take two steps forward and really zoom out and look at that IT infrastructure as well as your kind of your SOP framework all at once. So it's a good time to kind of hit a bit of the reset button. At Frontiers, we've decided to run with the Google Business Workspace. So we're moving into that. We're actually just kind of in the midst of setting it all up so that it's all integrated. So yeah, by August, I might be able to share a little bit more about how that's gone. Yeah, so it's, really zoom out, consider your approach, work on that knowledge base up front before you start diving into the weeds. So, upload all of your documents, all your SOPs, really just tell it about the context of your business, the people in your business. We did personality profiles. So we did the disc profiles for our entire company, which granted is only 20 people. I uploaded all of those into the knowledge base, which was also a game changer because it just
Right.
knows everybody deeply now.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, I think it's
I
definitely a
think
take a step back to take
I
two
think
steps forward.
AI is a great partner tool with those personality profiles. It's like turning something from 2D into 3D in terms of what you can really understand about another person. And so, how do you think? One last question here. How well do you think out of the box, quote unquote, softwares for our industry? And I don't mean apps, but I mean like, the main operating softwares. How do you think they're doing at keeping up with this? And how do you decide? Well, let me just think. How do you marry the two, if at all?
Yeah, I mean the big ones, from my understanding, are heavy on R&D, right? So your main players in the software spaces, they're gonna be on top of it, I think. I mean, so we're on Builder Trend, which is more of a construction software, and they're already layering in AI in certain elements of the program. I would assume it's the same in the landscape softwares as well, but yeah, I mean it's an exponential growth. So I think these leading edge softwares, you'll just see an explosion of it at some point. I think they're all dabbling in it now, but yeah, I expect to see it in a big way in the coming year.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you started off in what, LMN, was it? Was that your first software?
I did.
And it's come a long way since you started off in it.
I hear. Yep.
Yeah. What do you like about Builder Trend?
It's pretty comprehensive. Again, because of all those moving parts in the construction side of the business, you need something that's a little bit more project management heavy, a little bit more communication focused. So it's a bit more of a robust program, which is nice. But yeah, I mean, keeping track of all of the moving parts, all of the trade partners, all the sticks and bricks, and so
It's good for
job costing is a huge part of it.
and pulling in subs,
Scheduling,
I believe, right?
yeah, trade contractors, they're all on board on the program, so the schedule is dynamic. They get notifications based on when schedules change, and they've got input, and they can
Yeah.
acknowledge and
Yeah.
all that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah, it's great.
Hey, so the actual last question here. Tell us just something about you personally. How do you like to spend your time when you're not working?
Oh, I'm a pretty simple guy. Just be outdoors. I've got a couple young kids. My daughter's 8 and my son's 5. We're pretty hung up in camping, road trips. We've got chickens. We're about to get a few sheep, which will be fun. But yeah, just being outdoorsy. I like camping, hunting, that type of thing. Getting outside, get some fresh
Don't
air.
you don't you do like an annual trip with your brother across the whole continent to go fishing?
We COVID kind of put a bit of a damper in that, and we got out of the rhythm of doing that. But yeah, I would say there was a good 15, 20-year stretch there where we would fly out to Vancouver Island on the West Coast and go fishing every summer.
Hmm.
But yeah, we need to
Life
get
has
back
gotten
on
in
that.
the way, huh?
Life has gotten in the way. Yeah, whether it's the business or kids or COVID, it all got kind of just got busy there for a little bit. So
Yeah, I'm going to bet kids have something to do with
yeah,
that.
we have replaced that with some backcountry camping. My brother and I, we like to kind of take the canoes out into the wilderness, no cell reception, and get lost for a little bit.
That's great. Yeah, I did Boundary Waters once. So where you go up in Minnesota, up into Canada or on the Boundary Waters, and
Yeah, yeah,
that was a lot of fun.
very cool.
Well, we're going to see you soon and at the summit, and we appreciate you sharing your unique story with us.
Yeah, no sweat. It's a good time. Thanks, Jeffrey.